Hello, my name is Leilani Johnson, and these are film reviews for Metropolis and The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Both films are from the German Expressionist period. German Expressionism is an art movement from the earliest 20th century focused on presenting the world solely from a subjective perspective. It's typically focused on fear and anxiety, because during World War I, the German government banned foreign films so it could monopolize the industry and promote pro-German films for their citizens. German Expressionism was born of this due to Germany's isolation from the rest of the world and their distrust of an authoritarian government, ergo the focus on fear and anxiety. So this relates to both of the films. The style that they're told in is completely born of this. The first film, Metropolis, released in 1920, was directed by Fritz Lang. It is hailed as the first true science fiction film ever made. This loosely hidden analogy of communism is about a man named Fritz, who is the son of the master of the city of Metropolis. He lives a life of peace and luxury until a woman named Maria comes into his life, and he discovers all of the class struggles his father had kept from him. I liked the film. I wouldn't consider it a masterpiece, but I can definitely see how it would have been revolutionary. The special effects are well ahead of its time, and the sets were grandiose and beautiful, and the story was compelling. I think the movie was far too long. I do like a movie that's like a slow burn or takes a steady path to build up the tension, but 2.5 hours of Metropolis is excessive, in my opinion. The only part of the movie that I found specifically hard to watch was just because of a stylistic difference in 1920s films compared to today. The action, for example, when Maria is fleeing from Rotwang in the catacombs, is very jerky and amusing unintentionally. She bumped into the walls about 6 times and jammed her fingers into her mouth in fear, and I couldn't help but laugh the whole time because it was so unusual to me. It was very over the top, as vaudeville tends to be, but it's so different than how a film would be now, and it's kind of like a culture shock. Like when you go to another country and you see something that is just so unusual to you, you think it's funny, which is very disrespectful. That's kind of what it felt like to me. My favorite parts of the movie were the painted landscapes of Metropolis. They truly displayed how grand the city was and made me understand why Fritter's father was so proud and protective of it. And, they were just so beautiful. They looked like something out of a children's picture book. In the best way possible. And the miniatures they created were also similarly spectacular. They projected characters in them too, which I think was a new technology that was noticeably cool and ahead of its time. I was very attracted to the scenery, the paintings that they created. It made me definitely, I already said this, but it definitely made me understand how grand of a city Metropolis is, which can be kind of hard when most of the action takes place underground and away from the rest of it. Sometimes I feel like the story was plotting or hard to understand. This was because sometimes I had a hard time telling the characters of Freder and Georgie apart, and I figured out way later that they had switched lives. I think that was viewer error, though, and not the fault of the actors or the script. I was sleepy. The acting was sometimes not my favorite, but I think that was definitely more due to such a stylistic difference between the 1920s German Expressionism period and the modern films that I'm used to. As I mentioned earlier, the acting, particularly from Fred and Maria, were very over the top and strange, but that contributed to the Expressionism style of the film. Rotwang was also strange, but mad scientist archetype that this created is so commonly used today that it didn't feel nearly as strange to me. Because, Back to the Future kind of just blew the whole mad scientist thing out of the water, and I think it definitely was inspired by this, like the image of the scientist that we see today. That's him. I think that the workers are the true star of the movie. They were directed to plod in unison. They look exhausted, worn out at their last straws, and that's what opens the movie. I think that was a wonderful choice that really immediately established the chief conflict of the movie. I mean, it opened and I was like, oh, this is cool. This is definitely kind of like when you see a musical on the screen. Because I've read 1941. 1941. Yeah. But I haven't seen the movie. I feel like it would be kind of like that, the whole, but you see Les Miserables, like a musical in the movie format, and they try and encapsulate the whole grand, everybody working together, everybody creating a similar feeling together, and that's what they did with the workers at the beginning of this movie. That was pretty cool. That immediately, I was like, okay, I see where we're going. I see why this is a problem, and I understand. And it immediately, right off the bat, set that tone. That was very important. And from a writing standpoint, these characters' relationships are so deliberately fraught, like at odds with each other. They're very dramatic. You have the father-son relationship filled with love, but distrust and misguided protection. The above-grounders and the undergrounders relationship is paralleled in theirs. And Fred and Maria's relationship has no depth whatsoever, but it is a facet that makes us care for the characters and understand their motivations. Overall, my rating is a 6 out of 10 because I think it was a good movie, and it had a convincing script, impressive sets, and expressive acting. However, I'm not really longing to watch it again, and the effect it had on me was more evoked by how impressive a precedent it is to the movies that are made today. So yeah, it was definitely a worthy watch. I love it, but I don't necessarily really want to watch it. Like, go watch it right now. The next movie, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, was released in 1920, 7 years before Metropolis, and it was directed by Robert Wine. The story is told through flashbacks by a man named Francis. It is set in the town he used to live in, where mysterious murders are occurring. It becomes personal when his friend is murdered, and he and his girlfriend uncover the secret of Dr. Caligari, which is that he is able to completely control a somnambulist and uses him to commit random acts of murder. This film was well-paced and told in 6 acts. Each of them were perfect length, and it never felt as if the film was dragging or moving too quickly. I can definitely understand why this film would be the most defining example of German Expressionism. Stylistically, every aspect served to exacerbate the feelings of the characters' fear and dread. The most obvious... the makeup. The makeup on Caesar is very contrasting and bold. He has dark painted shadows underneath his eyes and his lips are black. Contrastingly, the rest of his face is stark white. He's possessed, and the murderer and his appearance is an extension of the dread that he inspires. And the most obvious example of the expressionist style are the sets and the lighting in the movie. One of my favorite gags is how tall the chairs are that the clerks are sitting on. It's to exaggerate the power they have over Dr. Caligari, and that makes it a perfect example of expressionism because that's how he feels. The stools are so tall that they're absurd, slightly comical, but they're also slightly threatening to Dr. Caligari. The clerks even mock him further, highlighting his discomfort at how much power they have over him. All very expressionist. The buildings, walls, doors, everything in this movie is disjointed and exaggerated to look like a dream world. The doors are anything but perfect rectangles. The buildings contort and curve. Even the outdoor scenes are obviously filmed on an inside set with painted shadows and lights on the grounds and walls. There are 90-degree angle pathways that stretch out absurdly, and the walls curve in over you. That was by far my favorite point of the movie, the sets. I was immediately attracted to them, and I wish I could live in such a world. Like a child's nightmare, but even more mundane. I like how the characters who inhabited them weren't put off by them, even the normal-looking ones, like Francis, Alan, and Jane. The fact that they didn't call attention to them was more unsettling and made us and them feel more out of place. Characters like Caesar blend into and imitate the crookedness of the environment in a way that he walks and moves unnaturally. Just, I also liked the score in the movie, at least the version that I watched. It was just an organ, sometimes playing a song, sometimes playing just a few discordant notes. It was very eerie, but not in an Alfred Hitchcock way with the violins shrieking constantly. The absence of sound with a note here and there is far more unsettling. I believe less is more in horror because the unknown is the mystery. I liked the story. As I said, it was very well paced, but I'm still not sure how I feel about the twist ending. I feel cheated, but that's only natural. I just haven't decided if I liked it or not. My rating of this film is an 8 out of 10. It was highly enjoyable to watch, and especially lovely to gaze at the set design and how it influenced the emotion and predicted almost every action of the movie.